Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Chicago White Sox March to October. And today, for the last time on a March to October in MLB The Show 22, we have the stat recap episode. The episode where I always get way too carried away because I love looking through these fictional stats. It ends up going way longer than it needs to go, but everyone who actually watches and sticks around, we all have a good time, right? At least I do. But I kind of intentionally cut out any point where I was talking about people's stats from the last episode because I wanted to save it all for this stat recap episode because we had some pretty insane seasons, especially as we got closer and closer to the end. And I already was getting carried away, so that last episode was kind of long to begin with, and if I would have left all that in, that would have been like a 45-minute episode. So we saved all of our stat talk for today. So let's get started. We'll talk about the standings first. Obviously, we cleaned up. We set the record. Most wins in a single season, 123-39. But unfortunately, we came just short of what technically would be the best record of all time. Because apparently the 1906 Cubs, they played 152 games, so 10 less games, but they still won 116. But obviously with less games played, that means 10 less losses. So their winning percentage, according to Google here, was 763, and ours finished at 759. So we didn't quite claim the title of best record in history, at least to me, it feels like we didn't. But we easily blew past that all-time wins mark. We got way past the 116. The Tigers were the only other team in our division with a winning record. I think they came up just short of the playoffs though, and then everybody else was pretty far under 500, probably thanks to me. I mean, we went 61-15 in this division, so we handed out plenty of losses just amongst these teams. All right, and how about the other divisions over to the East? I haven't even looked at this yet, so, well, I guess I know who's in the playoffs, but this will all be kind of a surprise to me, and it was the Yankees who won the East. The Blue Jays, man, I feel like that's 2 years in a row that they've had a really high team ranking. They're 5th overall, and they just haven't got it done. They might have finished with a 500 record also, like last season. But this is a pretty close division. I guess the Yankees won by plenty, but everyone was somewhat close. Even the Orioles, ranked all the way down at 28th, they still finished with 78 wins. And then the West, you had 3 teams making it from the West. Mariners with the division win, and then Angels and Astros in the wild card. The A's, man, they still haven't turned it around. We're 4 years deep and they're still one of the worst. The Rangers underperformed. They're still ranked 10th by the end of the year, but they didn't even come close. The Astros probably underperformed because they ranked 3rd, and since we're facing the Angels, we already know the Astros are out of it, and I'm kind of glad, because even if their record wasn't that great, that impressive this year, their team is still impressive and good, so I didn't really want to face them. But that means that we are the only 100-win team in the American League. Mariners came 1 win shy, and then the wild card, the Tigers were the first team out, and they were the only other team with a winning record. We had a lot of bad baseball in the American League, it seems like. Maybe that is kind of on me. Maybe I was just so good that we picked up so many wins that just nibbling a couple of extra wins off of each team made the records in general a little bit worse. Over to the NL, in the Braves, they finished with 103 wins. They were kind of the ones keeping pace with us. They're kind of the ones that we're probably destined to face in the World Series, kind of like last year with the Padres. They didn't fall off at the end though, like the Padres did. I think the Padres last year only finished with 90 some wins. So the Braves still stuck it out, got 103. Marlins also clinched a wild card spot with 94 wins. They're getting pretty good. That was actually that does remind me. I did look at one thing that was interesting that we will look at with the Marlins here before I forget. So I'll do that after we finish looking at the standings. But then it was the Nationals, the worst team in the league according to their rankings, but they finished 3rd in the division in front of the Mets and Phillies. And then in the NL Central, the Reds, they did it. I'm proud of them. I feel like their roster had been getting sneaky good, and then they went out and got a bunch of starting pitching in the offseason. They got Dylan Bundy after we turned his career around. Still though, for being ranked 6th in the entire league to only get 85 wins, I mean 85 wins, that's not even making the playoffs in the American League. No other team was at or above 500. The Cardinals, they were supposed to be good. They were 7th ranked. And then finally in the West, it was the Dodgers, another 100 win season for them. And then the Rockies with a wild card appearance. They had a losing record in the division, but they still went 92-70. The Padres didn't even make it this year. Giants, another team, a lot of the top 10 teams in terms of rankings did not make the postseason. All right, interesting there. And then let's before I forget then, that Marlins thing, because I think it popped up in the middle of the season on the little ticker at the bottom that Adam Haseley is good now. We traded him away all the way back in season 1 for Luzardo, and I think Haseley at the time was a C potential. He was a low 70s, maybe even high 60s, and we got Luzardo, who at the time I thought was a good return for him, but Haseley has really turned into something decent. I mean, with his his attributes, but then you look at his stats. Oh wait, he slumped. Oh man, okay, well this isn't as good as when I looked at it. I checked in on him all the way back before last episode, so like 30-40 games had been played since then, but at that point he had an average of like 320, but he, I guess, went cold at the end of the year. But still a couple of pretty good seasons. His first 2 full-time seasons he's done pretty well, and with Luzardo kind of not being allowed to be in the majors for us, you could make the case that they won the trade. All right, but let's start in on our stats, and I want to look at the pitching first so that we can talk about Ohtani first. And he just continues the trend of having probably the greatest season of all time. He's just like, ever since the real life season of 2021, I feel like every season has just gotten marginally better, and this year is the best one yet. His pitching fell off just a little bit. I mean, a couple years in a row of an ERA under 3, and he didn't quite get there this year. 338, gave up a few more homers, a few more hits. Still finishes with a 20-7 record, 258 strikeouts that might have led the league. A 5.4 wins above replacement purely from his pitching, but then we toggle over to the offense. 55 home runs is what he ended up with. 55, 39 doubles and 4 triples to go along with it, a 319 average, 386 on base, and then a slugging percentage over 700. Over 700! I mean, if this isn't the greatest season of all time, I don't know what is. And he has an 8 wins above replacement on just offense. So add that together, it was what, 5.4 or 5.8? 5.4. So if it works that way and you can just add it together, 8 plus 5.4, that's a 13.4 wins above replacement. And I don't know how this is calculated. Like, that might not be a perfect just add it together situation, because they might count the defense twice. Because like on the hitting side, every game he was hitting in, he was the DH, but he's still gonna accumulate fielding stats because of the games he pitched in. So like here, these innings played in the field, that's just his innings pitched. So there's a chance that he gets credited twice for his defense on the mound, but I'm not 100% sure. But yeah, either way, I mean, just ridiculous. So then our next pitcher, Luis Severino. Actually, that's another thing I forgot. Let's look at Ohtani's ratings, because another season of him staying at a 98, not regressing, because look at that hitting. He got the contact versus lefties up 7, power up even more both ways. He's going to get to double 99s here probably. But then with Severino, he was still improving. At age 31, he gets up to a 94, but he kind of just had another Luis Severino season. Like, he's had such similar years, all 3 since we signed him. Another 20-win season, another near 9 strikeouts per 9, pretty much the same amount of walks. He gave up a few more homers and a few more hits in general, so that's probably why his ERA was slightly higher. But I mean, really, it's just all 3 of these years, you pretty much know exactly what we're gonna get out of Severino. And then for Dylan Cease, he gets his way up to a 92 overall. Had some pretty solid progression this year. That Ks per 9 up to an 86. That's got to be one of the best for starting pitchers. And he actually turned it around enough at the end to bring that ERA down under 4. He was kind of struggling all year. That ERA was up like at 4.5, and that's pretty much all down to the home runs. He gave up a lot more home runs. I guess he also gave up more hits in general, which it's unfortunate that he had such a higher ERA because he improved at walks and strikeouts. Like if you go over here and look at the rates, he upped his strikeouts per 9 by a bunch and downed his walks per 9 by over a full walk per 9 innings. But then yeah, those home runs just skyrocketed this year. So he still turns in a pretty good season. I think he won like his last 6 games in a row because he was at 8-7. So he must have had a string of pretty good outings at the end of the year. But this was a contract year for him. So when we take this after we finish the playoffs and we're going to take this into franchise and do a little bit of simming for a couple of years, he's going to be a guy we got to re-sign right away. And I wonder if having a little bit worse of a year is going to make his price a little bit better for us. Otherwise, he's probably worth it to bring back. I mean, over a 90, still probably a little bit of room to improve. I don't know what his actual potential rating is, but he's in the low 90s. So then we go over to German Marquez, the guy I think probably won the Cy Young Award this year. Obviously, I don't know that for sure. You can't check that in March to October. You can't look at those screens. So I don't know what kind of year everybody else had, but I know the kind of year Marquez had. 24 wins to 5 losses. I know this game values pitcher records a lot when it comes to voting for Cy Young, but then he upped his innings pitched a bunch too. Pitched, what would that be, 13 more innings this year in the same amount of games, gave up less hits, less runs, less walks, and then the strikeouts, man, I don't know where that came from, because look at the season after, or the season we signed him based off of. I mean, everything has gotten better since then, but if you look at the strikeouts per 9, 164 strikeouts in 212 innings, and then you jump up just from that to this season, but then last season to this season, that is some improvement. A whip barely over 1, 24 quality starts, a 7.1 wins above replacement. I mean, we can't even rule him out from winning MVP. It all depends on how they evaluate Shohei, because he probably should be MVP. I mean, he definitely should be MVP. But if they don't actually evaluate his hitting and they just look at him as a starting pitcher, I think Marquez, he has him beat just in the pitching numbers, and I don't know, he might have enough to like be the MVP. Then moving to Skubal, another guy who he turned it around right near the end, finishes with an ERA under 4. He was hovering right around like the 4 to 4.15 mark, but he finishes at 386. Good amount of strikeouts. I feel like both the home runs and walk numbers were kind of bad to start the year for like a good chunk of the year. So to like bring them back to basically what it was last year in more innings pitched too. So like it's a lower rate when you look over here. I feel like that's pretty good. He also improved his strikeouts per 9 a bit. I think, I mean, especially for a 5th starter, this is the kind of season we got out of him. That's pretty good. And he's just going to keep getting better. We do have to re-sign him. Okay, I forgot about that. Or maybe we don't. I actually don't know for sure. Because his service time was under 6 years. And yeah, it doesn't have the contract symbol next to him. So I think that thing was lying. And he won't be a free agent. So we would get one more year out of him. Then over to the bullpen. And this is probably the first disappointment because Kopech, as the year went on, the numbers started getting worse and he just didn't turn out to be as good as he started. Like through the first half of the year, he was already at like 15 wins, a 2-ish ERA. I thought we found his role. I thought after all this time of him not being a good starting pitcher, of him consistently having an ERA higher than what the FIP says it should be, I thought after that first half when he was doing really good, I thought we found his role. Now I'm not so sure. I mean, you can't say that this is a bad year. I mean, an ERA like right at 4 is fine. 17-3 is obviously good. It's just, I really wanted him to stay dominant like he was at the start of the year. And that would have made me feel really good. But now, with him not having improved in his overall for the last 3 seasons, I think, and now he's going to be a free agent. I don't really see much of a need to bring him back unless he's going to be way cheaper than I think he would be. And then it's Johnny Lasagna with an amazing season, because look at that progression at 30 years old, and he went up that much. He didn't give up a run for the longest time, like 20 some innings. Finishes with a 1.35 ERA. He threw 51 or 53 innings out of the pen, which you don't see too much in March to Octobers. Like, if you're not the long reliever, you're probably not going to throw that many innings. But he didn't give up like any hits. The whip way under 1. He was a real good re-signing for us, and he might move into a closer role next season. Then you got AJ Minter, a guy we traded for during the season, and I mean, he just kind of took on the Aaron Bummer role of being a really good lefty that didn't get used, because I mean, he might have only thrown like 4 innings since I traded for him, and half of those were me using him. So in the time he pitched, he was good. That's really all I can say. I mean, I'm fine bringing him in the playoffs. I think I can trust him, but it's not like he put together much of a regular season, and neither did Jose Ruiz, even though he improved even more up to a 78. Did not have a good one. 15 innings pitched, 15 runs allowed, 15 walks allowed. He was giving up almost 2.5 base runners an inning. He had a -5 WAR. Not the year I was hoping for out of him. I thought with his improvement, I thought he'd do fine. He should do fine. I mean, a 78 overall is not helpless, but I don't know. I don't see a reason to not keep him around, so I don't have much more to say about him either. Graveman, another re-signing. We brought him back with Johnny Lasagna, and he probably wasn't the best re-signing. In his 23 innings, he gave up 12 runs for a 4.70 ERA, 26 strikeouts, not many walks. Just not amazing. Not super reliable, but not like terrible. And he's regressing a bunch too, so we got him around for another year. But how much he gets used, I guess we'll have to see. And then Crochet finally had a really nice year. Only 25 innings pitched, but 24 holds with 2 saves, 30 games pitched with only 25 innings, so you have to imagine that most of the times he was coming in, it was a pretty high leverage spot to just get like an out or 2. But yeah, I mean, a whip under 1, ERA right around 2, plenty of strikeouts. He would be the other guy in contention to be our closer next year. Taylor Rogers came back this year after barely getting used last year and had a pretty good one. 29 2/3 innings with a 2.12 ERA, a good amount of strikeouts. Hardly allowed any base runners. And this was the end of his contract. We had him signed for 3 years. And like, he was signed for $14 million a year. So in total, we paid him, what, $42 million? And he was good. I mean, he had good numbers. It's just he didn't get used much. Like, he got used probably over the course of 3 years for like 1 season's worth of numbers. So I don't know. I mean, was it worth it? I don't know. But he was good when he was out there. So I guess that's all you can really ask for. And then finally, Liam Hendricks hanging around for 1 more season. Still stuck at an 84 overall. He didn't go down too much. And he had a pretty good one. 2.17 ERA. He got 43 saves, so he is now the holder of the most career saves in White Sox history. And yeah, man, it's kind of crazy that he ended up doing that, because looking back 2 seasons ago, this was supposed to be his last season for me, and we were supposed to just go ahead, let him go, let Crochet be our new closer, but he was so good this year that I had to bring him back. He didn't do as good in this season, but then in our current year, he just went absolutely crazy. A few more walks than he's used to allowing, but still hardly gave up any hits. I mean, that is a stretch right there. 5, I mean, more than that, but just with the White Sox, 5 seasons in a row. 4 in the March to October of a whip under 1. And yeah, I don't see us bringing him back again next year unless we can get him for like $5 million or something like that, because we know he's just going to regress and it's going to hit even harder. he wouldn't be our closer even if we brought him back. So this was his last hurrah. But now we can move over to the offense, and before we get started talking about stats, we have to unfortunately talk about the CPU being dumb, because after the regular season ends and the postseason starts, it's all on the CPU to make those roster moves for who is on the postseason roster, and this is who we have. Our starting lineup is intact, but it's our bench that's the problem. They left Scope up and they left Angle up. Why would they leave Adam Angle up? We have Micah Adolfo, who is like an 82 overall. We even have James Outman, who is better than Angle, but for whatever reason, the game decided it had to be Angle that was up on our postseason roster at a 73. So, I mean, we miss out on having Wes Kath, we miss out on having Isaiah Kiner-Falefa. So not the way I would structure the postseason roster, but they're just the bench guys, so that's not a huge deal, or at least it shouldn't be. And hopefully it seems like we have our DH intact for this run, because remember last season when we were on this screen where it was supposedly our lineups against righties with a DH, we just didn't have a DH, but it seems like we do this time. Oh, it's versus lefties that we don't. Yeah, no, that's perfect. I knew it. I as soon as I realized that we have our DH for righties, I'm like, oh, it must be lefties that it won't give me. And yeah, it looks like it. So hopefully we face more righties than lefties, and then we can have our DH intact for the postseason. But we can start in talking about our seasons, and I really got to keep myself in check here because I could probably talk about everybody for too long because everybody went crazy. But we'll talk about Turner first, who really started getting hit by regression, lost 3 speed down to a 93, but he still turned in a pretty good one. The average a little bit down from the year before, but that was about it. 45 doubles, 8 triples, 26 home runs. Look at the amount of runs he's driven in. All 3 of these years, he's been the leadoff hitter. And because our bottom of the order has been so good at getting on base, he just drives in runs. 41 stolen bases to only 9 times caught. That was better than last season. But yeah, overall this was pretty similar to last season besides the average, and neither of these two really got to that same height that his first season got to, because this was a year, man. And he finishes with a 6.4 wins above replacement, which is actually a decent amount lower than even the year before. I wonder if the errors are a pretty significant factor to that, because he made way more errors. And then over to Moncada, the guy who I was not sure if I was going to re-sign. And man, it's a good thing I did, because he had probably his best season with us yet. Just shy of 200 hits. And I think he went a little cold near the end of the season because his average was up at like 350 and now it's at 334 to finish. So if it would have stayed where it was, he probably would have gotten over 200 hits. But he had 44 doubles with then 23 homers. So the most he's had yet in this March to October. Drove in 110. The walk numbers are right there with last year. The only thing that was bad was the stolen bases. And I feel like I could see that coming because he never had a good steal rating. And it's not like his speed is anything special. So these last 2 years when he was pretty good at stealing bases, it didn't really make sense. So this year it kind of came crashing down, and I bet that's going to have an effect on the WAR. Yeah, because I would say overall he probably had a better year than that season from 2 years ago, but he has a lower WAR, and I have to imagine it's because of those caught stealings. I mean, I don't know what goes into stolen base runs here, but he was negative by a significant amount. And then we have Luis Robert, who was still progressing a little bit, got up to a 95 this year, and he had what was his best season so far of this March to October series on the channel. He had 40 home runs for the first time in his career. 31 doubles, was a little lower than last year, but I'll take 13 more home runs at the expense of 13 less doubles. Same number of triples. That's back-to-back seasons of 11 triples. Scored a few more runs, drew a few more walks, stole a few more bases. That OPS got up over 1,000. Finish was with a 9.3 wins above replacement. I would say he's got to be another guy in the MVP race, also depending on how they evaluate Shohei Ohtani. But he's also a guy that is a free agent after this year that we got to bring back, and you got to assume he's going to be asking for whatever the maximum amount is. And then over to Eloy, another re-signing just like Moncada, and he probably did a little bit worse Well, I don't know. Because if you compare it to last season, it's pretty similar. Maybe even slightly better. Yeah, I don't even know why I was saying he did a little worse, actually. He had a really nice year. The average just not quite where it was these first 2 years. And I don't remember now. It was this year, right, that he won MVP. Not this year, or maybe it was. I don't even remember anymore. But he won MVP at some point. And he put up another good year. 42 homers. Cut down the strikeouts by a decent amount, too. Seems like he played a little bit worse in the field. I mean, fielding percentage is all we have to go by. So yeah, I don't know why that really means such a significant reduction in the wins above replacement. How do you look at a guy who put up these numbers, and how does he have a wins above replacement of only 2.9? That doesn't make sense to me. 40 homers, his on base was plenty good. I mean, sure, he's not swiping bags or playing amazing defense, but he also didn't ground into like a ton of double plays. He wasn't striking out a bunch. I don't know. I feel like they kind of gypped him a bit on the WAR. And then we already talked about Shohei, so we can go straight to TA, who probably had his best year of the entire March to October. First of all, he improved the potential out of nowhere to an A. I don't know how much that's going to really play a factor because he'll be 32 next season, but he had a pretty interesting year when it does come to his progression because, I mean, the power +7, +5, but then the contact against lefties down 9, and then you look all the way to the right, the stealing and base running aggressiveness went down double digits, but he finished with 33 home runs. Tim Anderson, 33. He also drew over 50 walks. Like, he turned into a different player this season. Was not stealing bases, was not good at that, but like 100 runs driven in, it's just weird. It's just so different than what he is known for. He finishes with his highest wins above replacement. Yep, 4.9. Over to Sheets, who, again, another guy with a very impressive season. A lot of progression for him. +8 and +6 against righties. He's really turned into a big-time platoon guy. But in another year of a pretty similar amount of games played, he went crazy. 37 homers for him in only 116 games. A 339 average with a 420 on base. OPS was almost at 1100. And then I don't know where this came from. 13 stolen bases and only getting caught once. I mean, his steal rating was a 4 to start the year, and now it's up to a 12, but it's not like his speed is good to compensate for the low steal rating, so I don't know where that comes from. But he finishes with a 7.4 because he was pretty solid in the field too. 7.4 wins above replacement without even being the full-time starter. I mean, we were still platooning him. He's still on the bench against lefties with good reason, though. I mean, I kept kind of looking at his numbers against lefties, and he didn't have a very good average against lefties, and that's all you can really see when it comes to splits. And his contact versus lefties here was like the only thing that didn't progress. So his numbers overall, I mean, maybe he sneaks in a couple more homers, a couple more hits and doubles and all that, but these numbers would have probably looked a little bit worse if we had him starting against lefties. But dude, just an amazing year, because like you look back to this first season with him, he was no good. He only hit 8 homers. I was expecting a lot more out of him. The average way down there. I think he had a negative WAR. Yeah, a negative WAR that year. And I remember thinking, yeah, I guess Sheets isn't going to be a big part of this team, you know, going forward. That's kind of the whole reason I got Sano too. But man, I was wrong. Turned into one of our best players. And then Andrew Vaughn. Another good year of progression for him, all the way up to an 88. The fielding is up to a 71 if I had him actually playing left field. He still probably didn't have as good of a season as that very first one, which is weird because that first season he was still like a mid 70s, I think, like maybe a 76, 77, but he definitely had a really good year and better than last season. The home runs up to 26. He was even swiping bags. I don't know where that came from him either. Pretty solid 851 OPS, 4.6 wins above replacement. I mean, on a team that didn't have so many people playing as well as our team did, this would look even better. But it kind of gets overshadowed with how crazy seasons everybody else has had. And that's no different with Zach Collins, because the first thing to point out is he went up +14 to contact versus lefties this year. We started out not even starting him at catcher when we faced a left-handed pitcher because I had Yermin. But he ended up proving me wrong there for making that decision. And then this is the kind of year he put together. This is so like, who would have thought when I first started this March to October that Collins would be this good? I mean, good enough power here, but the walks, he doesn't strike out a ton. 322 average with a 434 on base, almost 1,000 OPS. Really good wins above replacement. I wouldn't say he was as good as our 2 seasons of having Grandal starting, but Grandal's 2 seasons with us were so good, and he was such a high overall player that to get still these numbers that aren't much worse than Grandal's were from a guy that we're hardly paying and we just kind of got from within, that is a really good thing. And then we can move to our bench, and the first guy is Sano, and we saw his role get reduced even more this year. This is probably the biggest example of just having too many good players that we don't know what to do with, because he probably got gypped. He's still improved. He has really good ratings, but I mean, when we had Sheets doing as good as he was, and then also after we had brought him up, Mike Rodolfo doing as good as he was, there just wasn't as much room for Sano, and his power numbers went down. Still getting on base a bunch. He's still going to be a really good bench bat for the postseason, but his fielding really took a hit, and I think that's why his WAR is so low. And then we have Colson Montgomery, who got called up in the middle of the season. Good progression from him. Most of that was from his time in the minors, though, because his time in the majors was not good, and I'm starting to worry. Because I thought just last season in a very small sample size, I was like, okay, it's just a fluke. But then in a little bit more of a sample size this year, those numbers didn't really get better. And I mean, I know he's still got room to improve, but when you look at the stats he had in the amount of at-bats he had, and then you compare it to Zach Collins in this season when his attributes were looking pretty similar to what Montgomery's are now, and these are the numbers that Collins put together in small sample sizes, it kind of makes me worry about Montgomery a bit. So we'll have to see, you know, what his future holds. But of course, it's kind of funny that of the people that the CPU decided to keep around, they kept around the worst of our 3 call-ups. Like Westcath and definitely Adolfo were doing pretty solid, but they sent them down and kept Montgomery up for the postseason run. And then Scope, I mean, he played in pretty much the same amount of games. His numbers were a bit better. He was one of those auto signings, so I didn't even sign him this year. The CPU just decided we needed him for some reason, and I wouldn't say he did that great. I mean, he hardly had any slugging. 2 homers and 3 doubles, and that was it for his extra base hits. But on the bright side, I do like his swing. So if we have a chance where I can use him in some kind of situation, that might not be terrible. And then Angle, I don't really know what there is to say about him either, because he just regressed. When I signed him to this long-term deal before last season, that was pretty much just only for last season, but I had to offer him this duration just so he would accept. But we have such better options right now that I don't really want to be seeing him here. But in his time that he was in the bigs, I mean, he did what you'd expect him to do. He kind of just fit right in with all 4 of these seasons. Probably actually a little bit worse than the first 2. Probably more like the last season. And then finally, Yermin. He spent his first full year in the bigs. Well, I don't know. I count it full year because he was actually like on the team for the entire time. But I guess he still did get less playing time than his 2021. But he got sent down halfway through that. But he didn't end up doing as good as I thought he would. He started out really good, like real hot. He was hitting righties, he was hitting lefties. His average was like 330 something. But then he just kind of hit a snag midway and turned into this, which he's a backup catcher. You can't really get mad when backup catchers don't like light up the scoreboard or anything. And I guess that is how we end it. Kind of an underwhelming spot to end it on. Or wait, actually no, we won't end it there, because we can talk about our guys that got sent down, who did have a pretty decent portion of the year. on our team. So we'll start with Adolfo because we're there. He was up to an 82, a potential, almost 10 full overall points higher than Angle, but they decided we need Angle. And this is what he did in his time. 36 games, 142 at-bats. He batted 324, almost a 400 on base, a 960 OPS, 7 bombs. He's like good. He's like an actual good player. So I'm excited to have him for a couple years of simulating to see what he can do. James Outman we traded for mid-year. There's really no telling what exactly he did for us, but he didn't spend too much time on our big league team. The only thing that's unfortunate is his potential rating went down to a C. So that makes him a little bit less valuable moving forward. Who else? Who else was in the bigs for a bit? Wes Kath. This is what he did in a pretty small sample size, only 8 games, but he batted over 300, OPS just under 900. He got that first big league bomb, didn't really strike out at all. His hitting is definitely better than Montgomery's right now, I would say. So moving into next year, if we have a spot for one of those two guys to start, I might give it to Wes Kath over Montgomery. We'll have to see. Oh, and then Isaiah Kiner Falefa, the Babe Ruth of this team, really. Because look at these numbers that he had. I don't understand at any point why the CPU would feel the need to send him down. He would be a better backup catcher. I just don't know if the game recognizes his catcher secondary to automatically have him be our backup catcher and then also be like a utility player in games he wouldn't be catching. But yeah, he would have been nice to have up this year. Just, I mean, the numbers speak for themselves. We have him for another year, so who knows what he can do. But now that is going to be it for this stat recap episode, and there's a chance this could be the longest one yet because I'm sitting here at like an hour of recording and I don't know if I've ever made it to an hour in a stat recap. But next episode we are starting the postseason. We're facing the Angels, we're facing Mike Trout, we're facing Lucas Giolito, and we got to battle a bit in the first game, so it should be a fun way to start our postseason run. It's back to an even playing field. We played through so much of that season, so many episodes in a row, being so far in front of everybody that nothing really mattered. So we got to lock back in. It's going to be a fun postseason run. So guys, if you stuck around, if you enjoyed today's episode, hit that like button for me. And if you aren't subscribed and you actually watched all the way till this point, guys, hit that subscribe button. If there's any of you out there who are hearing this that aren't subscribed and watched to this point, man, how are you not subscribed? Hit that button for me. We're trying to get to 1,000. But that does it for this one, guys. Thanks for watching today. Thanks for stopping by, and I will see you next time.